Take picture. Pause recording. Button. Face centered. Speech off.
Hello, friends. Hope your day is going well. Welcome to chapters 3 and 4 of The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill. And we appreciate the Bible Broadcasting Network for allowing us to share this. Let's get started again with chapters 3 and 4 of The Hiding Place.
Pause, F bar button, Alt, P, Control plus P.
2025. Your own.
From the studios of the Bible Broadcasting Network, we present Christian Classics, reading from a book that has influenced the lives of many people. Our narrator is Lynn Brooks.
Today we'll be reading Chapter 3 from The Hiding Place. Still, Willem was not here. I said goodbye to some guests at the door and stood for a moment, gazing up and down the street. Although it was only 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the lights in the shops were coming on against the January dusk. I still had a great deal of little sister worship for this big brother, 5 years older than I, an ordained minister, and the only ten Boom who had ever been to college. Willem saw things, I felt. He knew what was going on in the world. Oftentimes, indeed, I wished that Willem did not see quite so well, for much that he saw was frightening. A full 10 years ago, way back in 1927, Willem had written in his doctoral thesis, done in Germany, that a terrible evil was taking root in that land. Right at the university, he said, seeds were being planted of a contempt for human life such as the world had never seen. The few who had read his paper had laughed. Now, of course, well, people weren't laughing about Germany. Most of the good clocks came from there, and recently several firms with whom we had dealt for years were simply and mysteriously out of business. Willem believed it was part of a deliberate and large-scale move against Jews. Every one of the closed businesses was Jewish. As head of the Dutch Reformed Church's program to reach Jews, Willem kept in touch with these things. Dear Willem, I thought, as I stepped back inside and closed the door. He was about as good a salesman of the church as father was of watches. If he'd converted a single Jew in 20 years, I hadn't heard about it. Willem didn't try to change people, just to serve them. He had scrimped and saved enough money to build a home for elderly Jews in Hilversum. For the elderly of all faiths, in fact, for Willem was against any system of segregation. But in the last few months, the home had been deluged with younger arrivals, all Jews and all from Germany. Willem and his family had given up their own living quarters and were sleeping in a corridor. And still the frightened, homeless people kept coming, and with them tales of a mounting madness. I went up to the kitchen where Nolly had just brewed a fresh pot of coffee, picked it up, and continued with it upstairs to Tante Jan's rooms. What does he want? I asked a group of men gathered around the cake table as I set down the pot. This man in Germany, does he want war? I knew it was poor talk for a party. But somehow thoughts of Willem always set my mind on hard subjects. A chill of silence fell over the table and spread swiftly around the room. What does it matter? A voice broke into it. Let the big countries fight it out. It won't affect us. That's right, from a watch salesman. The Germans let us alone in the Great War. It's to their advantage to keep us neutral. Easy for you to talk, cried a man from whom we bought clock parts. Your stock comes from Switzerland. What about us? What do I do if Germany goes to war? A war could put me out of business. And at that moment, Willem entered the room. Behind him came Tyne, his wife, and their 4 children. But every eye in the room had settled on the figure whose arm Willem held in his. It was a Jew, in his early 30s, in the typical broad-brimmed black hat and long black coat. What glued every eye to this man was his face. It had been burned. In front of his right ear dangled a gray and frizzled ringlet, like the hair of a very old man. The rest of his beard was gone, leaving only a raw and gaping wound. "This is Herr Gottlieb," Willem announced in German. "He just arrived in Hilversum this morning. Herr Gottlieb, my father." "He got out of Germany on a milk truck," Willem told us rapidly in Dutch. "They stopped him on a street corner. Teenaged boys in Munich set fire to his beard." Father had risen from his chair and was eagerly shaking the newcomer's hand. I brought him a cup of coffee and a plate of Nolly's cookies. How grateful I was now for Father's insistence that his children speak German and English almost as soon as Dutch. Herr Gottlieb sat down stiffly on the edge of a chair and fixed his eyes on the cup in his lap. I pulled up a chair beside him and talked some nonsense about the unusual January weather. And around us, conversation began again, a hum of party talk, rising and falling. "Hoodlums," I heard the watch salesman say. "Young hooligans. It's the same in every country. The police will catch up with them. You'll see. Germany's a civilized country." And so, the shadow fell across us that winter afternoon in 1937. But it rested lightly. Nobody dreamed that this tiny cloud would grow until it blocked out the sky, and nobody dreamed that in this darkness, each of us would be called to play a role. Father, Betsy, Mr. Kahn, and Willem, even the funny old Beyer with its unmatching floor levels and ancient angles. In the evening, after the last guest had gone, I climbed the stairs to my room, thinking only of the past. On my bed lay the new maroon dress. I'd forgotten to put it back on. I never did care about clothes, I thought, even when I was young. Childhood scenes rushed back at me out of the night, strangely close and urgent. Today I know that such memories are the key not to the past, but to the future. I know that the experiences of our lives, when we let God use them, become the mysterious and perfect preparation for the work He will give us to do. I didn't know it then, nor indeed that there was any new future to prepare for in a life as humdrum and predictable as mine. I only knew as I lay in my bed at the top of the house that certain moments from long ago stood out in focus against the blur of years. Oddly sharp and near they were, as though they were not yet finished, as though they had something more to say. It was 1898 and I was 6 years old. Betsy stood me in front of the wardrobe mirror and gave me a lecture. "Just look at your shoes. You've missed every other button. And those old torn stockings your very first day at school. See how nice Nolly looks." Nolly and I shared this bedroom at the top of the Beyer. I looked at my 8-year-old sister. Sure enough, her high-buttoned shoes were neatly fastened. Reluctantly, I pulled off mine while Betsy rummaged in the wardrobe. At 13, Betsy seemed almost an adult to me. Of course, Betsy had always seemed older because she couldn't run and roughhouse the way other children did. Betsy had been born with pernicious anemia, and so while the rest of us played tag or bowled the hoop or had skate races down frozen canals in winter, Betsy sat and did dull, grown-up things like embroidery. But Nolly played as hard as anyone and wasn't much older than I, and it didn't seem fair that she should always do everything right. "Betsy," she was saying earnestly, "I'm not going to wear that great, ugly hat to school just because Tante Jans paid for it. Last year it was that ugly gray one, and this year's it's even worse." Betsy looked at her sympathetically. "Well, but you can't go to school without a hat, and you know we can't afford another one." "We don't have to." With an anxious glance at the door, Nolly dropped to her knees, reached beneath the single bed, which was all our tiny room would hold, and drew out a little round hat box. Inside nestled the smallest hat I had ever seen. It was a fur with a blue satin ribbon for under the chin. "Oh, the darling thing!" Betsy lifted it reverently from the box and held it up to the patch of light that struggled into the room over the surrounding rooftops. "Where did you ever—" "Mrs. Van Diver gave it to me." The Van Divers owned the millinery shop 2 doors down. She saw me looking at it, and later she brought it here, after Tante Jan's picked up that. Nolly pointed to the top of the wardrobe. A deep-rimmed brown bonnet with a cluster of lavender velvet roses proclaimed in every line the personage who had picked it out. Tante Jan's, Mama's older sister, had moved in with us when her husband died to spend, as she put it, what few days remained to me, though she was still only in her early 40s. Her coming had greatly complicated life in the old house, already crowded by the earlier arrivals of Mama's other 2 sisters, Tante Bep and Tante Anna, since along with Tante Jan's had come quantities of furniture, all of it too large for the little rooms at the Bayet. For her own use, Tante Jan's took the 2 second-story rooms of the front house, directly over the watch shop and workroom. In the first room, she wrote the flaming Christian tracts for which she was well known all over Holland, and in the second, received the well-to-do ladies who supported this work. Tante Jan's believed that our welfare in the hereafter depended on how much we could accomplish here on earth. For sleep, she partitioned off a cubicle from her writing room just large enough to hold a bed. Death, she often said, was waiting to snatch her from her work, and so she kept her hours of repose as brief and businesslike as possible. I could not remember life in the Bayet before Tante Jan's arrival, nor whose these 2 rooms had been before. Above them was a narrow attic beneath the steep, sloping roof of the first house. For as long as I could recall, this space had been divided into 4 truly miniature rooms. The first one looking out over the street, and the only one with a real window, was Tante Bep's. Behind it, strung like railroad compartments off a narrow aisle, were Tante Anna's, Betsy's, and our brother, Willem's. 5 steps up from these rooms, in the second house behind, was Nolly's and my small room. Beneath ours, Mama's and Father's room, and beneath theirs, the dining room, with the kitchen tacked like an afterthought to the side of it. If Tante Jan's share in this crowded house was remarkably large, it never seemed so to any of us living there. The world just naturally made place for Tante Jan's. All day long, the horse-drawn trolley clocked and clanged past our house to stop at the Grootmarkt, the central town square half a block away. At least, that was where it stopped for other people. When Tante Jan's wished to go somewhere, she stationed herself on the sidewalk directly in front of the watch shop door, and as the horses thundered close, held up a single gloved finger. It looked to me more possible to stop the sun in the sky than to halt the charge of that trolley before its appointed place. But it stopped for Tante Jan's, brakes squealing, horses nearly falling over one another, and the driver tipped his tall hat as she swept aboard. And this was the commanding eye past which Nolly had to get the little fur hat. Tante Jan's had bought most of the clothing for us 3 girls since coming to live with us, but her gifts had a price. To Tante Jan's, the clothes in fashion when she was young represented God's final say on human apparel. All change since then came from the style book of the devil. Indeed, one of her best-known pamphlets exposed him as the inventor of the mutton sleeve and the bicycle skirt. I know, I said now as the button-hook in Betsy's swift fingers sped up my shoes. You could fit the fur hat right inside the bonnet. Then when you get outside, take the bonnet off. Corey! Nolly was genuinely shocked. That wouldn't be honest. With a baleful glance at the big brown hat, she picked up the little fur one and started after Betsy round the stairs down to breakfast. I picked up my own hat, the despised gray one from last year, and trailed after them, one hand clinging to the center post. Let Tante Jan see the silly hat, then. I didn't care. I never could understand all the fuss over clothes. Today on Christian Classics, we have been reading The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill, published by the Fleming H. Revell Company.
You've been listening to Christian Classics, narrated by Lynn Brooks. This has been a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network.
file from Tuesday, the hiding place.
Windows widgets window, MSN, web content, profile to region,
30th,
MSN.
25.
From the studios of the Bible Broadcasting Network, we present Christian Classics, reading from a book that has influenced the lives of many people. Our narrator is Lynn Brooks.
Today we'll be reading chapter 4 from The Hiding Place. What I did understand, what was awful and alarming, was that this was the day I was to start school. To leave this old house above the watch shop, leave Mama and Father and the aunts, and in fact leave behind everything that was certain and well-loved. I gripped the post so tight that my palms squeaked as I circled around. The elementary school was only a block and a half away, it was true, and Nolly had gone there 2 years without difficulty. But Nolly was different from me. She was pretty and well-behaved, and always had her handkerchief. Then, as I rounded the final curve, the solution came to me. So clear and simple that I laughed out loud. I just wouldn't go to school. I'd stay here and help Tanta Anna with the cooking, and Mama would teach me to read, and I'd never go into that strange, ugly building at all. Her relief and comfort flooded me, and I took the last 3 steps in a bound. Shh! Betsy and Nolly were waiting for me outside the dining room door. For heaven's sake, Corey, don't do anything to get Tanta Jan started wrong, Betsy said. I'm sure, she added doubtfully, that Father and Mama and Tanta Anna will like Nolly's hat. Tanta Bep won't, I said. She never likes anything, Nolly said, so she doesn't count. Tanta Bep, with her perpetual disapproving scowl, was the oldest of the aunts, and the one we children liked least. For 30 years, she had worked as a governess in wealthy families, and she continually compared our behavior with that of the young ladies and gentlemen she was used to. Betsy pointed to the Frisian clock on the stair wall, and with a finger on her lips, silently opened the dining room door. It was 8:12. Breakfast had already begun. 2 minutes late, cried Willem triumphantly. The Waller children were never late, said Tanta Bep. But they're here, said Father, and the room is brighter. The 3 of us hardly heard. Tanta Jan's chair was empty. Is Tanta Jan staying in bed today? Asked Betsy hopefully as we hung our hats on their pegs. She's making herself a tonic in the kitchen, said Mama. She leaned forward to pour our coffee and lowered her voice. We must all be especially considerate of dear Jan's today. This is the day her husband's sister died some years ago. Or was it his cousin? I thought it was his aunt, said Tanta Anna. It was a cousin, and it was a mercy, said Tanta Bep. At any rate, Mama hurried on, you know how these anniversaries upset dear Jan, so we must all try to make it up to her. Betsy cut 3 slices from the round loaf of bread, while I looked around the table trying to decide which adult would be most enthusiastic about my decision to stay at home. Father, I knew, put an almost religious importance on education. He himself had had to stop school early to go to work in the watch shop. And though he had gone on to teach himself history, theology, and literature in 5 languages, he always regretted the missed schooling. He would want me to go, and whatever Father wanted, Mama wanted too. Tanta Anna, then? She'd often told me she couldn't manage without me to run errands up and down the steep stairs. Since Mama was not strong, Tanta Anna did most of the heavy housework for our family of 9. She was the youngest of the 4 sisters, with a spirit as generous as Mama's own. There was a myth in our family, firmly believed in by all, that Tanta Anna received wages for this work. And indeed, every Saturday Father faithfully paid her 1 guilder. But by Wednesday, when the greengrocer came, he often had to ask for it back, and she always had it, unspent and waiting. Yes, she would be my ally in this business. Tanta Anna, I began, I've been thinking about you working so hard all day when I'm in school, and a deep, dramatic intake of breath made us all look up. Tante Jans was standing in the kitchen doorway, a tumbler of thick brown liquid in her hand. When she'd filled her chest with air, she closed her eyes, lifted the glass to her lips, and drained it down. Then, with a sigh, she let out the breath, set the glass on the sideboard, and sat down. "And yet, what do doctors know?" she said, as though we had been discussing the subject. "Dr. Blinker prescribed this tonic. But what can medicine really do? What good does anything do when one's day arrives?" I glanced around the table. No one was smiling. Tante Jen's preoccupation with death might have been funny, but it wasn't. Young as I was, I knew that fear is never funny. "And yet, Johns," Father remonstrated gently, "medicine has prolonged many a life. It didn't help Susie. She had the finest doctors in Rotterdam. It was this very day when she was taken, and she was no older than I am now, and got up and dressed for breakfast that day just as I have." She was launching into a minute-by-minute account of Susie's final day when her eyes lit on the peg from which dangled Nolly's new hat. "A fur muff?" she demanded, each word bristling with suspicion. "At this time of year?" "It isn't a muff, Tante Jans," said Nolly in a small voice. "And is it possible to learn what it is?" "It's a hat, Tante Jans," Betsy answered for her. "A surprise for Mrs. Van Diver. Wasn't it nice of—" "Oh, no. Nolly's hat has a brim, as a well-brought-up girl should. I know. I bought and paid for it myself." There were flames in Tante Jan's eyes, tears in Nolly's when Mama came to the rescue. "I'm not at all sure this cheese is fresh." She sniffed at the big pot of yellow cheese in the center of the table and pushed it across to Father. "What do you think, Casper?" Father, who was incapable of practicing deceit or even recognizing it, took a long and earnest sniff. "Why, I'm sure it's perfectly fine, my dear. Fresh as the day it came. Mr. Steerwick's cheese is always—" Catching Mama's look, he stared from her to Jans in confusion. Jans, what do you think?" Tante Jan seized the pot and glared into it with righteous zeal. If there was one subject which engaged her energies even more completely than modern clothing, it was spoiled food. At last, almost reluctantly it seemed to me, she approved the cheese. But the hat was forgotten. She had plunged into the sad story of an acquaintance, my very age, who had died after eating a questionable fish when the shop people arrived, and Father took down the heavy Bible from its shelf. There were only 2 employees in the watch shop in 1898, the clockman and Father's young apprentice errand boy. When Mama had poured their coffee, Father put on his rimless spectacles and began to read. "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. Thou art my hiding place and my shield. I hope in thy word." What kind of hiding place, I wondered idly, as I watched Father's brown beard rise and fall with the words. What was there to hide from? It was a long, long psalm. Beside me, Nolly began to squirm. When at last Father closed the big volume, she, Willem, and Betsy were on their feet in an instant and snatching up their hats. Next minute, they had raced down the last 5 stairs and out the alley door. More slowly, the 2 shop workers got up and followed them down the stairs to the shop's rear entrance. Only then did the 5 adults notice me, still seated at the table. "Corey!" cried Mama. Have you forgotten you're a big girl now? Today you go to school, too. Hurry or you must cross the street alone. I'm not going. There was a short, startled silence, broken by everybody at once. When I was a girl, Tante Jans began, Mrs. Waller's children from Tante Bep, but Father's deep voice drowned them out. Of course she's not going alone. Nolly was excited today and forgot to wait, that's all. Corey is going with me. And with that, he took my hat from its peg, wrapped my hand in his, and led me from the room. My hand in Father's. That meant the windmill on the Sparn, swans on the canal. But this time he was taking me where I didn't want to go. There was a railing along the bottom 5 steps. I grabbed it with my free hand and held on. Skilled watchmaker's fingers closed over mine and gently unwound them. Howling and struggling, I was led away from the world I knew into a bigger, stranger, harder one. Mondays, Father took the train to Amsterdam to get the time from the Naval Observatory. Now that I had started school, it was only in the summer that I could go with him. I would race downstairs to the shop, scrubbed, buttoned, and pronounced passable by Betsy. Father would be giving last-minute instructions to the apprentice. Mrs. Stahl will be in this morning to pick up her watch. This clock goes to the baker's in Bloemendaal. And then we would be off to the station, hand in hand, I lengthening my strides, and he shortening his to keep in step. The train trip to Amsterdam took only half an hour, but it was a wonderful ride. First, the close wedged buildings of old Haarlem gave way to separate houses with little plots of land around them. The spaces between houses grew wider, and then we were in the country, the flat Dutch farmland stretching to the horizon, ruler-straight canals sweeping past the window. At last, Amsterdam, even bigger than Haarlem, with its bewilderment of strange streets and canals. Father always arrived a couple of hours before the time signal in order to visit the wholesalers who supplied him with watches and parts. Many of these were Jews, and these were the visits we both liked best. After the briefest possible discussion of business, Father would draw a small Bible from his traveling case. The wholesaler, whose beard would be even longer and fuller than Father's, would snatch a book or a scroll out of a drawer, clap a prayer cap onto his head, and the two of them would be off, arguing, comparing, interrupting, contradicting, reveling in each other's company. And then, just when I had decided that this time I had really been forgotten, the wholesaler would look up, catch sight of me as though for the first time, and strike his forehead with the heel of his hand. A guest at my gates, and I have offered her no refreshment. And springing up, he would rummage under shelves and into cupboards, and before long, I would be holding on my lap a plate of the most delicious treats in the world, honey cakes and date cakes, and a kind of confection of nuts, fruits, and sugar. Desserts were rare in the Bayeux, sticky delights like these unknown. By 5 minutes before noon, we were always back at the train station, standing at a point on the platform from which we had a good view of the tower of the Naval Observatory. On the top of the tower, where it could be seen by all the ships in the harbor, was a tall shaft with 2 movable arms. At the stroke of 12 noon each day, the arms dropped. Father would stand at his vantage point on the platform, almost on tiptoe with the joy of precision, holding his pocket watch and a pad and pencil. There, 4 seconds fast. Within an hour, the astronomical clock in the shop in Haarlem would be accurate to the second. Today on Christian Classics, we have been reading The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom with John and Elizabeth Sherrill, published by the Fleming H. Revell Company.
You've been listening to Christian Classics, narrated by Lynn Brooks. This has been a production of the Bible Broadcasting Network.
And so we conclude chapters 3 and 4 of The Hiding Place. And next time we'll bring you chapters 5 and 6. Again, we appreciate the Bible Broadcasting Network for sharing these wonderful books with us that we call Christian Classics, and you can find them online at bbnradio.org. Goodbye.
Pause recording. Face centered. 30 minutes. Face pause. Take pic. Stop recording video.